What makes Azula compelling is not her intelligence, or her wit, or her skill as a firebender, or the sheer eclat with which she conducts herself as she schemes, but rather how it is impossible to know what is in the deepest depths of her soul. At first, we think we know she's evil. She's as arrogant as Zhao. The purity of her malice contrasts with Zuko's more confused nature. Zuko does not know what is right, but he does commit himself to doing what is right. Whatever his faults, he wants to be a good person, but he constantly struggles. Especially as all his old biases are swept away, not only because of the advice of his very wise Uncle Iroh, but also because of the empirical reality he sees. This is not theoretical for him. These are actual people suffering because of his father and his father's goons. Azula is not like that. Azula never has that moral struggle, allowing her to be a flawless lightning bender, as lightning requires purity of purpose. This is the impression Season 2 creates. She is a foil for Zuko, just as Zhao is a foil for him in Season 1. But the reality is a lot more complicated than that. By the tragic conclusion of Azula's story, the narrative wants us to ask not only whether she is as evil as we thought she was, but if she is, why? Is she innately like this, or is it because of her environment? Now, just phrased like this, it seems like another variation on the old nature versus nurture argument you likely heard way too much about in your intro psychology class. But again, it's the execution that makes this special, and it is the execution that we are going to examine. I'm so glad that they made Azula a lot more than just a standard one-dimensional foil. While I do adore Avatar: The Last Airbender, the whole idea of having some evil person chase Team Avatar around for all 3 seasons got a bit old by Season 3. In Season 1, it was both Zuko and Zhao. In Season 2, it was Azula and her gang, as Zuko was off on his personal quest of self-transformation. In Season 3, my favorite season of the show, we sadly get probably the weakest version of this, as the character who's chasing Team Avatar is Combustion Man, who is less a character than an obstacle. He's just a mute firebender that Team Avatar constantly has to avoid. Zuko evolves far beyond the role of villain and creates for himself a journey that is both mythically archetypical and vividly personal, so let's leave him out of the villain conversation. What we're left with, if we exclude Zuko, is a vast spectrum of villains. One kind of less than great, one that's quite good and interesting, but still limited in our perspective as the viewers toward him, and then one, Azula, whom we get to know really well, and whose downfall is genuinely devastating. It's one of the best so-called villain stories I can remember. Combustion Man is scary but bland. He's at the bottom of this spectrum. Zhao is somewhere around the middle. We are not invited to empathize with him, but he nonetheless feels like a real character with real feelings and motivations, and not just a being conjured out of the ether to cause suffering to Aang and his friends. Our perception of his character is set very early in the show when he chooses to duel Zuko, who, I may remind you, is a 16-year-old in an Agni Kai. Despite Zhao being a middle-aged military officer, and despite there being absolutely no practical or philosophical advantage to fighting Zuko, you understand how his ambition has driven him to such a high position in the Fire Nation Navy, and you understand how that same ambition ultimately proves his undoing. Though he is an admiral by the end of Season 1, this is not enough for him. What he's after is what the Greeks called kleos. The closest words we have to this are glory or renown. He wants to be known as the man who killed the moon spirit, and he fails. By the events of the Legend of Korra, only 70 years afterward, even the erudite Tenzin has no idea who he is. Tenzin, this man who probably has gone through hundreds and hundreds of books about his father and the history of his father's adventures, this man has no idea who Zhao is. That says a lot about how Zhao has been erased from the history books. There is a tragedy to that, but it does not compare to the tragedy of Azula, and not only because Azula is so young. When Zuko was her age, he was still on his quest to reclaim his honor by capturing the Avatar and getting back in his father's good graces, refusing to acknowledge that his father is a cruel tyrant. Azula should have had a chance to redeem herself along those lines, but instead she goes mad. As we don't see her in the Legend of Korra, we have no idea what happened to her long term. Now, it is entirely possible that she ends up being redeemed, and I've made several videos exploring this idea, but based just on the events of Avatar: The Last Airbender and the comics surrounding Avatar, this seems rather unlikely. We're left to lament the fate of someone who could never quite escape the pull of her family. While Zuko initially laments how his father despised him, he eventually realizes that his exile was a kind of felix culpa, or fortunate fault, as it led him to realizing that his father did not deserve his respect, for his father was a vicious despot who leads a country that wreaks horror and devastation on a world already weary from a century of warfare. At the end of Season 1, he sneers at a comment his father made about how he was lucky to be born while Azula was born lucky, but by the end of the show, he pities Azula. He wishes it could have turned out differently for her. The last shot of the final Agni Kai battle, with Zuko and Katara expressing empathy for the broken Azula, is more haunting and spine-chilling than anything in the entire Aang vs. Ozai battle. Yes, Azula was not normal, whatever that means. She has difficulty empathizing with others. And this, combined with her natural gifts for firebending, made her side with Ozai, as he awarded her lack of empathy and her pure martial arts might. He didn't raise her to be compassionate, he viewed that as a weakness. Her mother tried to instill this compassion in her, to try and get Azula to turn away from the darkness, but compassion is hard for Azula, while receiving praise for firebending is easy, so that's what she chose. Unlike Zuko, Azula never has to face the discrepancy between what she wants personally and what's expected of her. She never develops a conscience that's different from the will of the dominating and tyrannical Ozai. She believes that if she just follows his instructions, she'll be alright. And because of this, she believes in fear, she believes in conquest, she believes in domination. Love is not trustworthy to Azula. Love will flicker out and die. It's not an effective means of controlling people. Fear, however, is. But as she progresses, she realizes that her father was wrong, that the entire ethos she's had to accept is wrong, that fear is not 100% reliable. For Zuko, the revelation that the ideology instilled in him was wrong caused him to turn toward the light. But that's because he's always been fighting with the darkness ever since he was a little kid. Azula just accepted the callous and bitter values her father preached. So when those values fail, she doesn't know what to do. She can't turn toward love or compassion or the light like Zuko does. She's just left stranded in a pit of darkness. Being nearly flawless as a firebender, she's never had to confront failure. And this is the complete opposite of Zuko, whose life has been nothing but failure ever since he was a little kid. And especially when he was banished and removed from the line of succession when he was only 13 years old. As he says, he's had to struggle and fight, and that's made him strong. That's made him who he is. So no, I don't think Azula is innately doomed to a life of evil. I don't think that just because her brain works a little differently from others, that means supervillainy is her birthright. She even extends a little empathy towards Zuko when they're at their parents' beach house in the episode The Beach. She sees how depressed he is and implores him to come down to the beach with her. They make us care about Azula in a way they never made us care about Zhao, showing her as this vulnerable, trembling, uncertain, very human person very soon before she enters into her ultimate mental breakdown that leads to her defeat. It's devastating, and it's haunting, and it's not comfortable, and it's beautiful, beautiful storytelling. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching Avatar: The Last Airbender. It is a brilliant, lovely, compassionate show that I'm so glad is finally getting the respect it deserves. It really is one of the best programs of the 2000s. Now, here's hoping the live-action remake is good. I'm not confident, but there's still hope. And even if it's not, I still hope people keep on discovering this wonderful show, Avatar, for years and years and years and decades in the future. So anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Thank y'all again. Adios, comrades.